Welcome, everybody, to this exclusive interview with the one and the only former sheriff of Clayton County and your future United States Congressman of the 5th District in Georgia, Victor Hill. Thanks for coming, Victor.
Hey, thanks for having me, Aaron.
It's pretty awesome that you're here. Like, the famous Victor Hill is on my podcast. So
You're much too kind, man. You're much too kind.
So we were talking, and I want to start off with this because I think it's a great story for you to tell. So sure. you were on your brother's podcast, and you guys talk about comic books, and I watched it, and I thought that's the first time I'd ever seen your brother's podcast, and I was like, wow, man, this is a cool podcast because it's laid back and chill. It's just a bunch of dudes talking about comic books, and then they started talking about you and your comic book aficionado, and I was like, and then he said, well, Victor, his favorite comic book is Batman. And so we were just talking about that before we went live. So just go ahead and just kind of talk about how Batman became your comic book inspiration, because I think it's fascinating.
Sure. Well, I was a kid, grew up reading comic books. And, to be honest with you, for a long time, I didn't pay Batman any attention, probably because of the old TV series with Adam West. I thought it was just some type of kiddie fictional thing. You know what I'm saying? So I really thought that's what it was about, and how the Joker was just some guy cracking jokes and whatever. And then one day, I would say probably around the age of 13, I'm looking at this comic book rack and I see this comic book, and he has this different image. It looks very dark, very grim. And I took it off the rack. And then when I read it, I didn't realize, hey, he saw his parents get killed when he was 8 years old. They were shot and killed in front of him, bled out in front of him. And that drove him to becoming a vigilante. And so he decided that he didn't want to just figure out and hunt who did that, but all people that took people's lives. And it turned out to be very, very interesting, almost a psychological thriller. Like, I thought the Joker was just some guy that told jokes, but it turns out he was a psychotic serial killer. And of course, that they became probably the greatest hero villain thing known. Well, that was interesting, but little did I realize my life would take a twist that would be similar. That very same convenience store that I used to read that comic book at, a friend of mine was murdered behind it, disappeared. They didn't find my friend for a while. When they found the remains, mutilated, murdered, and it was quite an ordeal because where I lived at, that kind of stuff didn't happen. There was a lot of fear in the community or whatever like that. There was a homicide detective that solved that case and was able to catch those people. And it was that moment, that was my so-called Batman moment. That was when I knew that was what I was going to do. And I wasn't, there's all type of cops, as you know, there's traffic cops, probation cops. But I wanted to be the cop that would go after the criminals for which there could be no restitution, the death of a human life. And I spent a significant amount of time as a homicide detective before I eventually became the sheriff of the county.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty cool story. Just looking at how as young kids we're influenced by even just the tiniest little thing as a comic book, and then that kind of forges us into who we become in the future. And and as a lot of people who know anything about Atlanta, that you were a longtime sheriff of Clayton County, and then we look into what are some of the issues that happen in Clayton County, and some of the issues that became a problem for you in Clayton County, because as we were talking, we realized that, hey, Eric and Victor Hill have a lot of things in common.
Yes, we do.
So it made me I'm like, wow, man, I have a lot of things that I can relate to Victor Hill with. And
yeah, you're my brother from another mother for sure.
I can handle that.
Yeah,
that's a good deal. I feel a lot better now.
Yeah,
but it's just it's just a thing. Like, when you're in the system long enough and you know who the players are, and not everybody's quite as honest as what they play themselves off to be, because there's a lot of politicians in law enforcement, and a lot of people don't understand how close-knit politics is to the badge. And unfortunately, it can destroy things. Politicians getting involved in law enforcement is always a bad idea. Now,
Sure.
being the sheriff, that's a little bit different, because for you came up through the ranks. So you know how it is to be an officer. You know how it is to pull those long hours and to not sleep and to have issues in your personal life because of the stress and the overworking. And when you're surrounded by evil all the time, you start to absorb that evil. And so you have to be self-aware that, hey, man, I'm starting to go down a dark tunnel. I need to kind of step out and kind of reevaluate myself right now. So you've understood those things, so that becoming the sheriff and on the more political side is not as big of a deal for you, because you've seen all the struggles that every officer goes through. But go ahead and just kind of tell everybody what happened in Clayton County as we, go into the criminal justice reform, which I think is going to be a huge issue moving forward in America, in all counties, I think, and even into the higher courts. So if you could just go ahead and just kind of describe, some of the obstacles that you had to go through.
Yeah, of course. Well, lawfare is when the criminal justice system is used to target particular individuals. So you use the criminal justice system as a way to eliminate competition. Like, let's say, for instance, somebody's running for office and you think they can win. So, hey, I tell you what, how do we eliminate them? Well, I know what, we'll make them a convicted felon and send them to prison. That way they can't run. Or even if we just get the conviction, they can no longer run. And, a lot of people think lawfare is only done with politicians, but we've seen it done with celebrities, because sometimes it's done because people want to get 15 seconds of fame by saying who they prosecuted. But what a lot of people don't understand is it happens to the everyday man, and we'll get to that in a second too. But basically, to not be too long-winded, I was an outsider. Usually in certain circles, especially in sheriff's offices, usually a guy that becomes sheriff is a guy that's born and raised in the county. He's a person that maybe stayed in the sheriff's office for years. He got up to a certain rank. And then when that sheriff doesn't run anymore, people pretty much agree this is going to be who the sheriff is going to be. Well, that's not the case. I wasn't born and raised in Georgia even. I was born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina. When I relocated to Georgia, that's when I moved to Clayton County and got with Clayton County Police. So I wasn't in the political clique. I wasn't the person that the so-called political people who feel that they have the right to decide who's in office. I wasn't in that particular clique. And there's a group of people who feel that they make that decision. I was actually told when I ran for sheriff by a former commissioner, well, we'll decide who this next sheriff is going to be. And they had decided that. So when I ran, I didn't have permission. And then I didn't just run, I won.
Right.
So that was a whole big deal. Not only did I run, not only did I win, but I did what most sheriffs do and should do, remove that administration and put my own administration in. And that's a whole nother story in itself. Well, they realized that they weren't going to be able to win the election in a fair election. So that's when the lawfare started. When I first ran, they pretty much had a idea that I probably was going to win. So they changed the law about county employees running, basically saying that in order for me to run, I would have to quit my job. We had to fight that one. Then when I came back to run for re-election after losing after the first term, once I made that announcement, well, they didn't really completely win that election fair and square anyway. They did some crossover stuff, some whatever, and they barely won. And it wasn't on the up and up, but it wasn't nothing we could really prove. So, okay, well, I'll come back and win it again. And which was easy to do because the crime went out the rocket while I was gone. Well, yeah, the minute they heard I was running, next thing you look, the DA puts together a special purpose grand jury to investigate everything I did 4 years ago when I was in office. And then next thing you look, I get indicted on a 27 count indictment. and under RICO. And a lot of people, and I think that's where this myth came out about me being the head of the mob or something. But a lot of people didn't realize, right. But a lot of people didn't realize what the charges were really about. Really, those charges were, they said I stole my police car while I was in office, the same car 5 times. And that every time I put gas in it, it was a crime. And that I was using the office as a criminal enterprise. It didn't even come up to the total cost of $2,000. We know RICO is usually in the millions or at least hundreds of thousands of dollars. And of course, it was a farce because the sheriff has to keep his car 24/7, no matter where he goes, in case I got to respond if my guys get killed or whatever. Because I got the authority to get a plane ticket first class to come back if I need to. Well, much better to just have the car. Much cheaper, much quicker, or whatever like that. So, of course, I'm acquitted on all of those charges. Well, what a lot of people don't know is that 12 years later, or 10 years later, rather, I'm sorry, the same people, the same DEA's office, the same people that were involved in that prosecution came at me again. And it was the same objective, to get me out so that their guy could be in. And this time they came at it with a restraint chair. But a lot of people don't understand is that restraint chair investigation started and was fed to the feds because one of the guys that was in the restraint chair, who had been in there 2 times before, was now a campaign worker for the guy running against me for sheriff. The guy that's running against me for sheriff was a former deputy I fired for stealing guns. And had
it's amazing how that works, huh?
Exactly. So all of a sudden, well, I think he was put in a restraint chair because he's working on the campaign. That's not true. The guy been in the restraint chair 2 times, and the guy's crazy. Everybody knows it. There's a documentary coming out about it, and it'll show a lot of it. Well, interestingly, when these indictments come and everything, they don't indict me for him. And we know why. Because if he goes to trial, it would clearly show it was politically motivated and connected to a campaign. So ironically, what they do is they come to the jail and they pull every use of the restraint chair, which is a total of 630 times. But I authorized it approximately 10 times. So all of the other 600 times it was used by other people, they ignored it. They only looked for the times I used it. Then they went and contacted these people, who some had been out of jail over a year. And hey, were you in a restraint chair? Yeah. Hey, you're a victim. Oh, I am? Okay, what? I can get my charges dropped?
Yeah.
Oh, I can get some money and sue?
Some money.
Yeah, I urinated on myself and I felt pain. Okay. And all of them suddenly urinated on themselves. Okay, well, let's think about this for a second. Where's the decontamination reports? We can't take a guy that urinated on himself and then put another guy in the chair. The chair is used all the time. He would have to have a change in uniform.
Right.
When you look at the pictures and some videos, there's nothing there to show that. And if they did urinate on themselves, I certainly didn't order it. So who was it? Because they get checked on every 15 minutes. They get restroom breaks. Right. Who was it that told them, no, you can't get out the chair, just urinate on yourself? And why weren't they indicted? So it was clearly a political thing. Now, not only that, it was a case with no case law precedent. Never in the history of the country can anyone find even a lawsuit where someone was sued for simply ordering a person to be in a restraint chair. Usually had, some type of physical violence or whatever like that. That never occurred. So the case should have been dismissed, but the judge wouldn't dismiss it. Well, why? Well, guess what? The judge and the DA are friends. Yep. The judge's husband used to work at the DA's office during the time they came at me for the RICO indictment. The judge is Facebook friends with a political opponent trying to take the seat with this going on. So you got all of these connections that nobody know about. We're not allowed to present that in court. We're not even allowed to present the equal protection stuff where, hey, look, y'all investigate a case in Gwinnett County where they were tasing and beating people and putting them in chairs. No prosecution, just a lawsuit. We couldn't even present that, and we weren't able to present the stuff about how it started as a political campaign. If we were, I don't think I wouldn't be sitting here today. When I mean sitting here, I think I would be on your show if you asked me. But you know what I mean. None of this stuff would have ever happened. You know what I'm saying? Right. So that puts it in a nutshell.
Yeah, and unfortunately, so this is some of the problems that we have in the court system is you have all these personal relationships. Everybody hangs out at the same place. They all go to the same country clubs because those types of people in those positions have very limited places that they can go to where the public won't bother them or notice them or retaliate.
And some of them went to law school together.
Right. So they've built these relationships. However, the problem with that is those relationships potentially, if they do not recuse themselves because of the relationship, violate people's due process.
And that's what happened in this case. The judge should have recused herself.
She did?
No, she should have and
yeah,
did
she should
not.
Have.
Right. Not only did she push the case through, it was a case that should have never went before a jury. Right. But the jury deliberated for 4 days. It was a holdout jury. And she did something we've never seen before, call him out twice in front of the media and everybody. I mean, it was obvious the case of the juror comes out and says, hey, I got people yelling at me, screaming, calling names. Any other judge would have called a mistrial.
Right.
If because she was connected to the people running against me, connected to the DA who was trying to get me out to get this guy in, of course, she was a part of the whole thing. And as a result, her job was, I'm going to get a conviction out of this no matter what. And then, and then you got to think about this, you got these judges, they all know each other, they're friends, they go to conferences, they do whatever. So they friends and went to conferences in law school with DAs, or my husband, before he was a state judge, worked at the DA's office with this particular DA. How can anything be fair or something like that? How can it?
Yeah. And that's a good point, because I feel like that's going to cause more backdoor deals. And that's what happens a lot in court. And anybody who's been in law enforcement long enough knows that when there's like questionable cases like yours was a high profile case. So there's going to be some backdoor talking that happens that the public's not going to know about, that you didn't even know about, most likely.
Absolutely.
How are we going to deal with this? How do we make this happen without, cutting too many throats on it? So,
right. You're right. And she basically had some Freudian slips at my sentencing and said that.
Right.
The sentencing was very, very interesting. I actually, not promoting it at this time, but I actually wrote a book about this. And I got some of the transcripts in the book of the things that the judge said. Because, Freudian slips are very, very interesting. She admitted that there was never a case like this, that it was a novel case. And so you got to ask, if that's the case, what the Supreme Court has said, if it's a novel case and there's no clear-cut precedent on these civil rights cases, they shouldn't even go before a jury. So if that's your research said that you don't see any case on file like that, why did you push it before a jury? It was because of relationships. I got friends here. They want this guy prosecuted. I got to deliver for them. And that's what it is. And it was just a lot of bizarre things that happened at that trial. And then you could trace it to the fact that the judge had relationships with people running against me, people who wanted to see, wanted me gone, or whatever.
Yeah, in your situation, ain't the big red flag should have been campaign donations. As soon as you find out that there's campaign donors involved, that changes the whole game. That's 100% corrupt, because that money is now in play in a court hearing that involves someone's due process. The campaign people should have been completely wiped out of that whole case and never should have been talked to about nothing, because of the bias.
I agree. Now, I can't say that the DA or any of them, that they're a campaign. First of all, they're too cheap and too broke probably anyway. But we know the relationships there. We know for a fact the judge and the DA are friends. Her husband worked with the judge. The judge is Facebook friends with my political opponent. The husband was friends with another one of my political opponents. So what do you expect? And like I said, just that right there. And then the fact that the guy that the case started over, the guy that they put on a search warrant, okay, why, if he was on the search warrant because you felt he was in there, why wasn't there an indictment on that? Now, that's what we got to go to next. Okay, what can we do to fix lawfare? Well, where do you see lawfare going the most at? You see it going the most in states or jurisdictions where there's grand juries. Unfortunately, there's a federal grand jury, so they're in every state technically, but there are some states that have abolished it. What a lot of people don't know about grand juries is every country on the planet has abolished it, with the exception of Liberia, and Liberia rarely uses it. So we're the only country left where we have a star chamber hearing going on. A grand jury, any prosecutor can walk in there, and you're not there. A lot of times you're not even notified it's going on.
Right.
Right. They don't tell you, hey, we're presenting the case before.
You have no representation in a grand jury.
Right. No, right. You're not there. Your attorney's not there. And not only and so you can't be there to rebut. No. You can't be there to see what's going on. So they get to tell the grand jury whatever they want. Yep. And there's no accountability because most of it's done in secrecy. Most of it you're not even allowed to see. So they can tell the grand jury anything. Well, we know for a fact they lied to the grand jury. How do we know? One of the indictments said that that a mask was put over a guy's face and he was punched. Then when the mask was taken off, I was standing there. Well, we know that that's a lie. How? Because we don't have masks where people can't see. The only mask that we ever use in a jail is a spit mask where they can see through. They just can't spit on you. So if their mask was really put over his face, he would have seen who punched him, if anyone punched him at all, which I don't even believe that happened. One thing we know if it happened, I wasn't there. Because if I was there, I think everybody know what would have happened. They would have been instantly fired. Right. Okay. So you tell a grand jury something like that, and you inflame them. Wow, this guy's putting masks on people and punching them. We go to trial, it never comes up because they know it's a lie. He testifies, but he never says he was punched. He never says I was there. It shows we got to say whatever we can say to get the indictment. So you got prosecutors. If you go before a grand jury and you lie, you best believe you're going to get a charge for perjury.
Oh, for sure.
The prosecutors lie to grand juries every day. Not all prosecutors. I'm sure there's honest prosecutors out there, but the ones we're dealing with in my case definitely weren't honest. So they're allowed to lie to grand juries, and there's no accountability. And so that's why they say you can indict a ham sandwich, because a prosecutor has the ability to go in and tell a grand jury whatever he wants just to get an indictment. Okay, so now you're indicted. So now you're going to have to either come up with a whole lot of money to try it, which most people don't have and can bankrupt most people, or you got a plea gun to your head. Well, what's the best way for me to get out of this? And then a lot of people end up pleading to felonies, and then they end up becoming convicted felons, whether they're guilty or not. And that's not right. So part of my thing about running for Congress is this. We have got to, I would like to see grand juries abolished. Now, that's not simple because it requires a constitutional amendment, but we could at least reform it. At least the defendant needs to be notified. He can be present with his attorney and he can rebut it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's not easy because it's not easy that we should just abolish it altogether. We should, because that's not a good way to do business when you could just walk in and say something to a group of people without the person's knowledge, without him rebutting it, and lie to them to get them indicted. It needs to go away altogether. But reform is also another option and good start. You do that right there. If you get rid of that, I believe that half your prison population and half the cases that back up the criminal justice system won't even be there. Because if they had to actually show probable cause and real probable cause facts and actually do something that fits the element of the crime, you wouldn't see that. Take, for instance, how did my case rise to a felony? They weren't touched. They were checked every 15 minutes. They were checked by a nurse before they got in the chair and after they get out the chair. Well, guess how they were able to pull that off? There's a misdemeanor and a felony phase. I'm not even guilty of a misdemeanor if we get a chance to go into the details. But guess what? There was one word under the felony part, and it said pain. So one of the prosecutors, because I had an inside person that was there, interviews a guy who was in a restraint chair, and he said, "Is this you?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Did you feel pain?" "Yeah, I felt pain." And he says, this prosecutor gets up and says, "That's all we need." So now we can prosecute him for a felony instead of a misdemeanor. Why was it so important that I get a felony? Because they needed a felony to stop me from running for office again. Right. If it was really a crime and they was really trying to protect inmates, which they could care less about the inmates. They were just really using them as a way to get at me. And of course,
Right.
again, they're inmates. So what? I can get my charges dropped. I can get some money. Yeah, of course. Okay. So that's what it is. So they use one word so they could justify elevating something to a felony that, if it was true, would have been a misdemeanor. And this is the type of craziness, but that doesn't just happen to me. Doesn't just happen to celebrities. It happens to people every day. Somewhere today, not today, today's Sunday, but somewhere this week, a grand jury is going to meet and prosecutors are going to walk in there. And I'm not saying all prosecutors are corrupt, but the ones that are, like the ones I dealt with, a prosecutor is going to walk in there and tell them whatever he wants because he wants to get that indictment. And he knows that usually if he could just get the indictment, he has nothing else to worry about, because 90% of the people are going to fold, and not fold necessarily because they're weak and not because they're not fighters. Some of them, it's just they got families, they got all kind of stuff, and they can't come up with $500,000 to fight something.
Yep. And you're exactly right. The system is set up so the prosecutor can bully you into a plea agreement. And we talked about this yesterday. It's all about a plea agreement. Nobody wants to spend all the X amount of dollars on a trial. Trials are expensive. So they stack the deck. They overcharge you for one at the grand juries. You're overcharged with no real evidence to back that charge. And they just say, well, we'll just push it through. We'll use that as a negotiation tool to bring the charges down to something that he's willing to do the time for.
Eric, you're so on point, and it's wrong. Let me give you a good example about our DA in Clayton County, Tasha Mosley, in a situation like that. We had a very tragic incident in Clayton County. A student is running around a track. She collapsed. She dies. It was very hot. Okay, I get it. Maybe that should have been a day they called off the track meet. Maybe they should have got her more water. I actually get it. So if you want to say that is negligence and it needs to be a lawsuit and the family needs to be compensated, absolutely. Even if you wanted to go criminal at, involuntary manslaughter. Involuntary manslaughter means you weren't trying to kill anybody, but because of some negligence, a person died. So if you want to push it that far, which is discretional, you can. Okay. She indicts these coaches for murder. Now, you're an ex-cop. Murder means malice of forethought. It means that I plan a murder. I plan an execution.
It's like they held her out there and made her dehydrate.
Exactly. Hey, keep running. And they were looking as if they were saying, okay, has she collapsed yet? Is she going to die? I'm sure they're just as devastated, even more maybe than, I'm not going to say they could be devastated more than the parent, but if you cause somebody's death or injury, it's very, very whatever. Like I said, if you ever had an accident, even though you didn't mean to do it, you had an accident and injured somebody, it's not a good day. And a lot of people don't understand that, but that's going to affect you in a different way. You may not have the physical injury, but you're injured because you didn't mean to hurt that person. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So to indict them for murder, and then, like you say, well, we'll indict them for murder. That way we can get them to plead to involuntary manslaughter. That's not right. If they're guilty of involuntary manslaughter, then you should have enough to convict them on it, whether they plead to it or not. So why charge a person with something they're not guilty of just to get something through, or just to bring it down to another level? Just like what they did with me. What they accused me of, if it was true, would have been a misdemeanor. But they wanted to make sure that they did some nuance to turn something into a felony. And it really wasn't, like I said, we'll get time, maybe sometime, to go into the details of that. But it wasn't a crime at all. But if it was a crime, it would have been a misdemeanor. It's just like these coaches. If you're going to charge them, it's involuntary manslaughter. It's not murder. So you're going to get them the death penalty? Yeah. Are you going to give them life without parole for an accident?
Yeah.
And that's the type of stuff these prosecutors do. And the sad part about it is, if you just say, okay, we got to get them unelected, well, that's every 4 years. It's like this dummy prosecutor we got in Clayton County. She didn't even have any opposition. So we're stuck with her for another 3.5 years. So how do you solve it? And then who's to say the next person you elect is not a dummy either? You know what I'm saying? So what we have to do is put guards in. It's kind of like when I was a sheriff, I wasn't so much interested in locking up drug dealers as I was able to take their ability away to sell drugs.
Right.
Because you can't really change a man's heart or a desire to do something, but you can stop him from doing it. I can't change a guy that wants to use my yard as a shortcut, but I can put up a barrier so he can't walk through there anyway. I'll put a dog there. So, okay, well, I would cut through his yard, but it's just too many whatever to do it. Well, that's what we got to do with these DAs. And the tool that you see they use to do all the lawfare that they do against people, not just celebrities, not just politicians, but everyday people, is a grand jury. You take away their ability to walk in and tell a grand jury anything they want without a rebuttal, without legal representation.
Right.
And you will stop their ability to do the type of things they do, to say, okay, I don't like this political candidate and I don't want him to win, so let's indict him. If they don't have the grand jury, then they can't do that. If you notice, all of these prosecutions start with indictments. They never come from a warrant. It's always an indictment. And no matter how high or whatever, it's an indictment. You can indict anybody. You can indict a ham sandwich. You can indict the president. They've already proved they can go in there. And then and let me say one more thing. I don't want to be too long-winded. Not only can they indict a ham sandwich, but they can also not indict whoever they want, because they guide the grand jury. So let's say hypothetically, okay, I tell you what, I'll just put on a show like I tried to. Okay, I don't want to indict you, but I'm going to just take it before the grand jury. Then I'm going to come out and do a press conference and say, well, we took it before the grand jury, but they didn't indict. They're lying. They told the grand jury not to indict. Right. The grand jury is going to do whatever they tell them to do. All they are is a rubber stamp. So anytime they tell you that, hey, we took it before the grand jury, but they didn't indict, 99%, they told the grand jury, I don't really think there's nothing there, whatever. They told the grand jury what to do. It's rare they take something in there and the grand jury has its own mind to do whatever it wants, because they're just a bunch of untrained citizens. They don't know the elements of the law. That's why they'll indict a coach for murder when the element is really involuntary manslaughter.
Right.
So they're going to do whatever the DA has fed them for months, Chick-fil-A, lemonade, whatever, told them how wonderful they are. Hey, you're helping us. Hey, this is a case, whatever. And they're going to do whatever the DA tells them to do.
Right. And that's a good point to bring up, to kind of just, you kept talking about the elements, and a lot of people don't understand that there's elements, there's factors that have to be present in order for a crime to be charged. So there's certain things that have to be in place in order to get a charge. So at grand jury, they don't need to follow that criteria, even though that's the law, even though that's how the jury is going to be instructed to view the charge, is by the elements of the crime. And that's how the judge is going to sentence you, by the elements of the crime. But at grand jury, you don't have to follow the elements of the crime. There's really no rules that a prosecutor has to follow at grand jury, other than get a bunch of people in there, manipulate them to push the indictment through. And a lot of people don't understand that.
And they don't understand, but here's the problem. When you do that, you've already prejudiced the jury.
Right.
Because the grand jury has already indicted the person for that. So you've got this element here where, the grand jury already indicted. So it takes a lot of threshold to get people to get past that. And actually, the weaponized DOJ will brag and talk about they have a 90% conviction rate. But first of all, 90% of the people took a plea.
Right.
And we see it all the time. You use a grand jury that you lied to. And then when you get to trial, they cheat there too, because they tell you what you can present and you can't present. A person defending themselves shouldn't be prevented from presenting anything that could prove their innocence.
Right.
First of all, that's preposterous. This is something that could prove to a jury or make us say, hey, maybe we don't need to convict this person. But the judge is going to do what they call a motion in limine and say, no, they can't say that. Well, if the judge has a personal vendetta, like my judge did in relationships,
Right.
She didn't allow anything in there that she thought could help me win. So then you go in there with your hands tied behind your back. So it's a system that a lot of people don't understand. It's not like they're getting all these convictions because they're so great. And it really doesn't have nothing to do with they have unlimited money and unlimited resources. They have the unlimited ability to cheat and lie is what they got. Right. And when you do that, and then you put it in the hands of people who will weaponize the criminal justice system for political reasons, revenge, or whatever, that's dangerous, and that has to change. And like I said, we've seen this weaponization going at the highest level.
Absolutely.
Let me say this. People have their own politics. They like who they like. They don't like who they like, and that's fine. Okay, but I've always said this, and I will say this no matter who doesn't like it or not. If you don't like the man, you don't vote for him. But you don't indict people and make them convicted felons and send them to prison because you don't want them to be president, because you don't want them to be sheriff. That's going too far. When we were kids, I think they told you the same thing they told me. Well, they got to, because we're brothers from another mother, right?
That's right.
Son, you can run for anything you want. You can run to be the president of the United States. They never told us, but if you run, some prosecutors might indict you because they think you can win. That's wrong. That's wrong. If you don't like the man, if you don't like me, then you don't vote for us.
Right.
But to indict us, and because you think we're going to win an election, that has to stop. And it's wrong. I'm running as a Democrat. I've run as a Democrat all my life. A lot of people, there was a question whether I was going to run as a Democrat or Republican or not. And the reason for it was a lot of people thought I would run as a Republican or change Republican. Why? Because it was a Democratic DA that did this twice. It was a Democratic U.S. attorney that pushed it. It was a Democratic appointed judge. So they were like, how can you run after what they did to you? But I liken it to this, I don't know about you, but we all have some folks in our family, we all have some gangsters in our family. I know I do. Two of them I had to run out of Clayton County. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have had a cousin I've had to put on a Greyhound bus and send back to South Carolina. And another one I had to run to DeKalb County. One, we're still good today. The one I sent to DeKalb County, we haven't spoken to this day, but they're still my family. I still love them. Right. But they're wrong. They were wrong. The weaponization of the criminal justice system was wrong. It doesn't make it right if you're a Democrat doing it to a Republican. Just as it's not right as a Democrat doing it to a Democrat. It shouldn't be done to anyone.
Right.
And so lawfare is something that I'm going to fight. And I think we have an amazing opportunity to fight it because, there are people in place now who have been a victim of law enforcement, up to including the president. So Correct. If we can't agree on anything, we're going to definitely agree on that.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. And, just like in my situation, the one thing, like we talked, your first bill of guilt comes from grand jury. So
yes,
when you go through grand jury and they issue the indictment, it already shows the sign of guilt. So even though you didn't have a chance to even defend yourself against,
you didn't even have a chance to defend yourself, and everybody's like, "Oh, he's indicted. He must have done something." You're right. Yeah, it's a very unfair system, and people don't understand until they've gotten indicted or had a friend indicted. And so that brings up another thing, and I'm researching it now. Because just like there's freedom of assembly, there's freedom of the press. But let me tell you what else goes on. You're tried by the media,
right?
Like take for instance my RICO case. Every day on the news, 27 count RICO indictment. Like I said, you got people to this day that swear I'm the John Gotti of Clayton County. When I went to prison, my nickname was Training Day. They thought I was some legendary gangster coming, and it's like, and no one realizes that this idiot DA in my county charged me with stealing a police car 5 times, the same car, 3 years after I'm out of office. So they must have cared so much about this car that was still there, by the way, And you know, I think we got rid of it by the time I won re-election. But a car that was still there, hey, he stole it 5 times while he was a sheriff. How? Because when he crossed this line, it was no longer in this jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. So all the media said was 27 count indictment, 27 count indictment. Well, guess what?
That carries weight.
Right. Well, they knew what it was about. And I know they knew what it was about because we sent it to them.
Right.
But they would never play that. And there needs to be legislation in place, constitutional legislation, that limits what they can say so a person can get a fair trial.
Right.
And furthermore, let me tell you what else I would like to see become a law. I know it sounds far-fetched, but I think I think you might be support for this. What's the name of the couple? What's the name of the how can I forget the name? I'm having a mental lapse right now. The young lady that John Benet Ramsey, little girl gets killed. They played forever that these parents did it. They had everyone believing they did it. Okay, it has been proven they didn't do it. I would like to see a law that comes out that says if a media plays 10,000 hours of making a person look guilty, they got to play 10,000 hours of saying, hey, they were actually innocent. We were wrong. Right. It was amazing how much publicity they got. Yeah. And then when that DNA proved they didn't do it, I'm riding my car one day, and for a split second, DNA evidence came out the day that the killer of John Benet Ramsey was not her parent. Boom, that's it.
Yep.
Okay, had I not been driving in the car at that moment, I wouldn't know. Then I think Netflix just came out with a documentary about it that I saw that was pretty good. But a lot of people probably didn't know till this documentary come out. And there's, believe it or not, there's some people who don't watch Netflix, so they still don't know it. Maybe they didn't watch it. But I think if you're going to spend a certain amount of time making a person look guilty, you've got to put out the same amount of stuff that they're not guilty afterwards, or maybe even during.
Right.
If you're going to put out what he's being accused of, exactly. Yeah. Then for every hour you put out what he's accused of and what somebody said he did, maybe they should have played every day that, guess what? This started with a guy who was running against me, whose campaign worker was used to do this. Because if that was put out, people would have a very different view of what I was charged with and what they put me in prison for.
Yeah.
So you're tried by the media, and you're tried by a jury that you don't even get to present a case in front of. So how are you supposed to win that? You know? Right.
You can't. And it reminds me of something that, like I was saying, a lot of my viewers already know that I'm working on these corruption cases in London, Kentucky, and I came across a situation where this young lady was a witness to a murder, and so they issued a subpoena for her to testify. Well, she didn't have to, because the suspect ended up taking a deal. So she forgot about it and never showed up. Well, they issued a warrant, but they wrote the warrant wrong, that she was wanted for murder.
Wow.
And so they went, and the U.S. Marshals came and picked this girl up and took her to jail. They blasted it all over like, hey, yeah, we got this murderer off the streets, and ruined this girl's reputation.
Yes.
And then come to find out, after 2 days of being in jail for nothing, like, oh, they wrote, well, hey, we wrote the warrant wrong. But they never issued anything to the public to make it right with this girl.
Absolutely.
And it still shows up when you look her up that she was arrested for murder. So this girl is going to, she's going to be having this. She's got to sue him, is what she's got to do.
Absolutely. But there should be equal time. If you spend an hour of media time talking about a person's wanted for murder, then you should spend an hour at a time talking about, hey, this was a mistake. We got the wrong person. And that's something I'd like to see in acting, because look at Richard Jewell. This kid wanted to be a cop. He actually was a hero, but the media turned him into a bomber.
Right.
And his life was never the same.
No.
And he never got the amount of publicity for being innocent that he got for being guilty. You know, I'm doing an interesting experiment right now. I think you get a kick out of. We got a local reporter in Atlanta. His name is Tom Jones. And and he is a nasty reporter. I mean, he's someone that will report one side of something and don't get the whole story. And I think everyone knows the media. I quit dealing with them years ago because it was a waste of time. Even if you give them a statement, they cut it up in certain parts and don't put out the complete story. Well, interestingly, he got in a situation where someone videoed him pulling somebody out of a car and fighting the guy to get out the car. And the guy kept slamming him in the car. Nobody's really sure what happened. And a cop came up. And, you know, the first person saw the video thought he was stopping someone stealing his car. Maybe he was, maybe not. So other people look at it and says, no, it looks like a domestic dispute. Maybe it is, maybe it's not.
Yeah, it's confusing.
Interesting. Right. But it's interesting that the news channel never did a story about that. Now, any politician, any other person that would have a confrontation like that, they would be getting a camcorder video. They would be trying to call the person. So I did a story on it on my social media.
Yeah, you did.
And even invited him. Hey, give me a call. Let's talk about it. Nothing. Now, you know, when other people don't call him back, like I never called him back. Well, he won't return our call for comment. What's interesting, he's not returning my call for comment. Why is it that they're not doing a story on it? Why is it whatever? Why is it okay to put the camera on certain people, but it's not okay to put the camera on them?
Right.
You know, it reminds you of that saying that hunting is no longer fun when the rabbit has a gun. So what happens when people start reporting stories on reporters? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But they're public figures. Are we going to hold them to a high standard too?
Right.
Or we're going to report all of their domestic problems? Or is there some unwritten rule that, no, we only do that for officials or celebrities, but reporters, they can have a domestic dispute on the side of the road and get in a fight? But we're not supposed to report that and talk about that because protected. Right. I thought no man's above the law, so no man should be above that. You know, really, journalism is probably the most, there's no real certification or license. Right. Anyone with a camera and a pen is a journalist.
Right.
Right. You may have went to school for it, but it doesn't give you any more authority than anybody else. If you got a camera or and a pen, you're a journalist. I mean, we got a young man now that goes around and reports stuff like he's a news reporter. And I mean, it's legit. He has a huge following.
He's funny too. I like him.
He is, right.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right. And I think he's got an interesting point. I think now, you know, media are mad at guys like you because they realize podcasts are getting more attention than they are.
Yep.
And a news reporter recently said at a meeting that there needs to be something done about this because I didn't go to school for all these years for someone to just sit in their living room and do what I do for whatever. Well, actually, it doesn't take a lot of education to do what they do. I mean, how much education does it take to lie or get half of the story or facts right? And don't report the facts all the way. You get what I'm saying? So I think more people are trusting podcasts. So when people say, I don't do media, well, this is media. I do media. But I do podcasts where people can hear my whole thought and they don't chop it and make it a story and turn it. A person can listen to it and get the whole thing. But those are the type of unique issues because lawfare is not just the weaponization of the criminal justice system. But as I write in this book, Vigilante Sheriff, that I wrote, how the media and the weaponization of the system works together. You know, they indict you, then they send it to the media puts it out, it poisons the jury. And all of that is the weaponization or lawfare. And it doesn't, like I say, just happen to guys like me. It happens to the everyday man, as you know.
Right. You know, I've had, you know, my own story in there, and it's affected me and it will affect me for a long time. And so I 100% feel that pain and know what it can do when you go against the grain and then somebody who has a higher rank than you decides they want to put you in your place for good. And it's unfortunate that people have to, like you said, if you don't like me, that's fine. You know, run against me or, you know, hey, move me to another department or whatever. Don't ruin my life. Don't conspire behind my back and cause all these problems because it's trickled down to where now, you know, my ex-wife, who was my wife at the time, she was hurt by it. My kids were hurt by it. My family was hurt by it. My parents. So it didn't just hurt me. It hurt everybody around. And that's the part of it I don't think that they quite grasp, that it's a widespread. I have a humongous family. So there was a lot.
I don't think they care. No. I think they'll stop at nothing to
whatever
get power, seize power. And so people don't realize, they think, well, in America that doesn't happen. There's a lot of political prisoners in America. I was not in prison because I violated someone's civil rights. I was not in prison because 6 inmates walked into the Fed's office and say, help us. They actually didn't make a complaint. They went and found them.
Yep.
They went, hey, were you in a chair? You're a victim. And the one that started the whole thing was working on a political campaign. So think about it. 6 criminals was used to convict me. And they were promised charges dropped, lighter sentences, whatever, money or whatever. And then let me tell you this, man. What is the cost of lawfare? That's what we got to talk about too. You know, if the way that I was running the jail was wrong, how do you explain that when I ran it, there was no cell phones, there was no drugs, there were no murders? Now it's infested with cell phones, infested with drugs.
Yeah, I saw your picture the other day on TikTok. The guy standing there with the 2 shanks and the cigarette in his mouth, or the weed or whatever it was. I'm like, man, that's what I'm never going to Clayton County ever.
Yeah. It's like, you know, you can go in there for a misdemeanor and come out in a body bag now.
Right.
And you got to understand, 5 people have been murdered there. We're not talking about having a heart attack and died, and somebody debating whether if they did this, they could have resuscitated them. Murdered. We never had that at that particular time.
Right.
And, you know, we knew what we were doing. I knew what I was doing. It's completely legal. You can restrain people if they show pre-attack indicators. Exactly. They can be restrained for safety and observation. The policy said it. Right. They lied and said it violated the policy. Is not true. They lied and said, well, you know, they were uncontrollably be violent. That's only one instance. The policy clearly says you could do it for as a preventative measure. And we proved that it prevented it, because nobody was getting murdered when that chair was used as a preventative measure. Now we got 5 dead bodies, and assaults went up on officers over 100%, and assaults on inmates went up over 200%, and numerous stabbings.
Yeah, that's a problem. And I'm not hearing anybody in Clayton County talk about how are we going to fix the problem except you. So that's where we're at with that. When these situations happen, you would think somebody would sit around and go, hey, this is going to get us sued and it's going to cost us a lot of money. So maybe we should, and it shouldn't be about the money, but unfortunately, that's how politicians work. Well, if the money, let's not get sued, maybe we should change our policy, or maybe we should review some things. They're not even doing that. They're not.
Let me give you one better than that. Okay. The guy that was trying to take my seat, who was the chairman at the time, Jeff Turner, he had a lot to do, not just with my prosecution, but he actually forged a letter and tried to make it look like I wrote it, to see if he could get me charged with that, to see if he could get me put in prison earlier. And this is not made up. We got witnesses and everything, right? Okay. This guy used to coordinate lawsuits against the sheriff's office. If I fired somebody, hey, go see him. Okay. Hey, you need to sue. He would set it up. So he was actually setting up lawsuits, and he would tell people he's costing the county money. Well, he's costing the county money because he's the one setting up the lawsuits. Because why are you worried about who I'm firing? If I fire them, they need to be fired. Well, there was a reason these folks were getting fired. There's no way for me to run that jail effectively. If I don't fire these people, guess what they're going to do? They're going to bring cell phones and drugs into jail, which we didn't have. They're going to be slack, and people are going to get killed. So what's going to cost them most money? All the overdoses in the jail now, when they start suing for that, the 5 dead bodies, or firing folks that are negligent and don't need to be there because they're not performing. So when you get government, when you got officials in government working like that, and then they're lying to the taxpayers saying, well, you know, he's costing us money. And they're the ones. And now what we got? We got a cesspool, stabbings, drugs, overdoses, murders.
That's no good.
Right. I assure you the price tag for that is going to be a whole lot more than firing some folks.
Yeah. And Georgia's a right to work state anyway, so you can fire whoever you want. That's what I used to do. Like, hey, you don't like it?
Yeah, that's what they say. But again, when you weaponize the weaponization of criminal justice system is not just throwing people in jail, but it's also lawsuits.
Yeah.
Right. Just like these guys, they promise, these guys have been out of jail for a year, never complained, never said they were injured. And now all of a sudden they sue after they're told they're victims, and they come and they make up these stories about, I was tortured, I urinated on myself, which nothing happened. You walked out of the jail, didn't go see a doctor, didn't do anything, and now you got a lawsuit. And guess who one of the judges is on the lawsuit? The same judge that was friends with the DA, and husband used to work there, and friends with my political opponent, and wouldn't dismiss the case despite no case law precedent. Now you see how there's this web that we got to fix in the criminal justice system, and how it's weaponized.
Yeah, and that's what I talk when I talk to the community members in Kentucky on the case I work on. They're like, well, this has been going on for a long time, and it's great you're here, but nothing's going to change because it's been going on for a long time. I said, look, that's what's happened. You're normalized to corruption, and who's to say that you can't rewrite the standard for your community? It can be rewrote. It's going to take a community to fix it, but you don't have to accept corruption. You don't have to accept politicians just going rogue and doing whatever they want, and the conflicts of interest and everything else, and the back scratching they all do to each other. We don't have to accept that. They've taken the Overton window and they've moved it on us, and they've been doing it slowly over time to where we'll accept these types of things. And that's where I think we need to, as Americans, we need to look at our justice system, especially because it's a huge issue in every community, and say, well, how can we stop this type of stuff from happening? Because it's affecting families. Everybody can name somebody in your family that's been affected by the judicial system.
Absolutely.
Anybody can say, hey, I know somebody who was overcharged, or hey, I know someone who was charged with something they didn't even do. And they pled out the stuff that they didn't do, because either do 30 years or get out in 4 years. Which one are you going to do? Are you going to chance the stacked jury you're going to get?
Absolutely.
It's a no-win situation if you're a defendant going through the court system.
And that's why this campaign is so important. And that's why it's so important for me to get to Congress to fight for that. Because like you just said, everybody knows somebody. It's not just about fighting for people who are convicted felons, right or wrong. Because even the ones who are wrong, I got to fight for them too, because even though they were wrong, they've already paid their debt to society.
Right.
So now that they paid their debt for society, we're still giving them life sentence. I mean, in Tennessee, they can't even drive a tow truck. I mean, come on. Okay, the guy paid his debt to society, but we're giving them a life sentence. We invite them to church. Hey, the Lord's going to forgive you all your sins, but we never forgive them. So we take, you can't be a doctor. You can't be a lawyer.
You can't get 90% of the jobs that are out there. Sorry.
You can't. Right. And then we act surprised when they reoffend. So this affects the two things that people are concerned about. They did a poll about what are people really concerned about in politics today. And believe it or not, it's not transgender, it's not all this other stuff, is safety in their pockets. And the criminal justice system affects both. It affects safety and it affects the economy in more ways than people can ever imagine. You fix the things that you and I are talking about fixing. And they can it be 100% fixed? No. But you just do something as simple as fix grand juries.
Right.
And you would be surprised how that will ultimately affect the economy. And, those type of things people got to look at, and ultimately affect safety. Because when you do things to people like that, you also create another sect that they turn rogue for real because they have no other choices. And that affects what? Safety.
Yeah.
So it's
safety,
it's like a pendulum. Safety, pockets, safety, pockets.
Right.
Because when you look at it, the criminal justice system has a lot to do with money anyway. I mean, a guy gets out of prison and then you tell him he has to pay the probation office so much money a month or whatever like that. Some of that they just stopped doing, which I'm glad they did. Right. But I mean, the dude already been away for a while, don't have a job, don't have whatever. and now he has to come up with these fees. I mean, at what point does it stop?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Like you're only going to get a $10 an hour job. You got to get caught up on your back child support because they're hounding you for that. And then you got your parole fees on top of that, and probably any court fees from the trial or the court case. So you're automatically, you get out, your back's up against the wall. You have a tough time finding a job. Everybody's saying you owe us money. And I guess I'm going to go on the streets and find it.
So by fighting this battle in Congress, I'm not just fighting for convicted fellas, wrongfully convicted or rightfully convicted. But remember, I'm fighting for their children. I'm fighting for their parents. I'm fighting for their friends. Like you say, everybody, even if you haven't been wrongfully convicted or rightfully convicted, you know somebody who has, and you've seen the dysfunctionality in this stuff, the stuff that doesn't make sense or whatever. And to me, this campaign is not just in the 5th district. It's a national campaign. There's 19 million convicted felons in this country. And a lot of people, convicted felons can't vote. Well, no, they can't vote, but they didn't stop them from giving money to campaigns. If every convicted felon in this country gave $5 to this campaign, and if their family and friends, wives, girlfriends, or whatever, because they need them to be successful too. That's how they support their wives and family. Right. That's how their parents can know where they're productive. They can take care of themselves. If every convicted felon gave $5 and all their friends and family gave $10, that would be more than enough to not just take this message to Washington when I'm elected Congress, but also take the message now that there's a group of people out there, not just the folks that went to prison. We're talking about their families, their children, or whatever, that aren't being represented. And we got to, like I said, I think now we got an amazing opportunity to get something done. There is the man who's second in command of the BOP was once a federal prisoner. A woman that was going to serve 25 years of life for a first-time nonviolent drug conviction is now the pardon czar. I don't know if people realize the significance of that.
Right.
So we have an opportunity, a window, to probably do some great things to change the criminal justice system that we may never see again.
Right. I think you're right. We have the right president that's been through that fire, and is probably the most likely of any president we could probably have that's going to be receptive to hearing that argument. So I think the time is right.
Absolutely. So what does that mean? Let me tell you this. A lot of people don't know this, but I'm a former state representative. I was actually a state congressman. And when I got elected as a Democrat, but for the first time in 100 years, the state turned red. So we had a Republican governor, Sonny Perdue. The House was Republican, the House was Senate, and now I get elected, and the Democrats are a minority. So what did I do? Did I go there and start calling the Republican names and being disrespectful to the governor or whatever? What I did was I worked across party lines to see what we could get done. Did we agree on everything? Of course we didn't agree on everything. I mean, one time the governor wanted me to work on something and I couldn't work with him on. I said, Governor, I can't work with you on this, but I want us to stay open because there's things we can work on together. Just because I can't work with you on this one don't mean I can't work with you on something else. And I was able as a freshman legislator to author and pass 4 bills into law. And I know some folks have been there 20 years and they haven't passed gas. I hate to put it that way.
No, you're right. Okay. You're right.
So, we got an opportunity to get something done. And the only way to get it done is to work across party lines. Okay, we know what folks don't agree on, but what can we get done? And that's what we need to concentrate on. There's supposed to be a problem-solving caucus right now in Congress. I read about it. I don't know if it's still functional or whatever. I hope it is, but it's where Democrats and Republicans get together to see what they can work on, because there's some issues that have absolutely nothing to do with party lines. Right. Everybody wants to be safe. Everybody wants their pockets to be able to protect their family. When I was a sheriff of Clayton County and someone dialed 911, we didn't ask, are you Republican? Are you Democrat?
Right.
Are you whatever? right? You called, we came, and we came because you deserve the protection that every citizen in this country deserves. You don't deserve to have your house broken into, to be the victim of a carjacking. Those type of things have nothing to do with partisan stuff. And when we start looking at those issues that affect everyone, white, black, short, tall,
Right.
Jews and Gentiles, whatever, now we can get some stuff done.
Right.
Not on who we don't like and whatever. I've never been that type of politician and never will be. What can we get done? And there's some things, every leader is going to have something that you can get done with that particular leader. And I believe that with the situation that you just described and I just described, we have an opportunity to get something done about criminal justice that we may never have again.
Right. I'd also like to see more oversight amongst the judges and prosecutors, because
Absolutely.
I know there's a system in place, but it just seems like it's broke, or there's just too many judges and prosecutors for the oversight to really pay attention to. And that's where you're seeing a lot of that corruption fall through the cracks. People will report these people, and then we see nothing out of it. And then we see people's lives are ruined because, the judiciary board didn't do anything.
They did create a prosecutor oversight committee in Georgia recently. And the only bad thing is that so much has happened. They don't have jurisdiction of anything that happened before they were created. So it has to go forward, because like with our DA, just the fact that she covered up child molestations is probably more than enough. But at the time that happened, they weren't in existence.
Right.
And actually, she fought against this. She actually was down there testifying before the committee why there shouldn't be oversight over prosecutors like herself. But they exist now. So it's going to be interesting to see. It's the most glimmer of hope that we've seen. And they're supposed to actually have the ability to remove a DA. So we're going to be watching to see if that happens, because, there's other things that she's been involved in. And hopefully the citizens of our county will get a relief from her, because, it's an interesting situation. She was appointed and then never had opposition. So she was never chosen by the people.
Right.
And then we ended up not just with a lackluster DA, but one that's involved in all type of weaponization schemes, but yet at the same time, you're covering up actual crimes if they're your friends.
Right. So let me ask you this. So how what's the population of Clayton County?
300,000 people and 144 square miles. So the third smallest county, but the fifth most populated.
So there's a lot of people crammed into Clayton County. Now, what blows my mind is, how could anybody run opposed in a county with a population of that size?
Well, Eric, there's a vacuum of leadership. It's amazing. I've always found it amazing that when officers come up, usually 2 or 3 people run at most.
Right.
Because you think about this, okay, like take and DAs is kind of funny too, because you got to be a lawyer to run. If anybody could run for DA, then hell, I would do it, because I could definitely do a better job than she does, and I'm not even a lawyer. but here's the thing, I used to always think that there's a lot of officers here, and it's 300,000 people, and only 2 people want to run for it. And maybe the reason that less people want to run is because of people like her that weaponize the system to attack people when they do run, or to do things to people. And people are like, hey, do I want to put my freedom and life on the line to lead when the folks in power will do stuff like that? So that could be part of the reason. But there is a vacuum of leadership in a lot of areas. And some of it may well be because of the issues I want to address in Congress, which is lawfare. And let me say this, lawfare encompasses so much stuff, not just criminal, civil, because you can use civil as lawfare against officials and people, because I've had them attack me criminally and civilly. But you got everything involved. You got the news media, but you also got a vicious circle, because when you talk about criminal justice reform, you're not just talking about bad judges and bad prosecutors. You're also talking about homelessness and mental illness.
Right.
Because the criminal justice system is very dysfunctional in those 2 areas right now.
Right.
Mental illness is a problem that's plaguing the country now. And it's dangerous because, okay, a person snaps and he walks in, like you saw what happened in New York, and just starts shooting somebody, meant to shoot some people at the NFL, but shoot the wrong. It would have been tragic either way. So how we deal with mental health is an issue, because now the county jails have become the mental health centers, and it wasn't designed to be that way. And a lot of this you can track back to the 1963 Health Act, Mental Health Act, that was signed by JFK. And I don't think that was the intent, but the domino effect was all the asylums started closing across the country. So there was no longer any place for these people to go. So the long-term care is gone. So there's a problem with a person. If you can get him committed, you're lucky if they keep him 72 hours and he's back out there. And we've got some tragic situations going on across the country, and some even locally right in Clayton County. And there's a guy that I got called for help on, because I still get these calls even though I'm not the sheriff at this point. And this guy's been taking apart his house. He's been shooting deers with a bow, and carving the deers right there and setting fires and stuff. And it took them calling a guy out of office for me to make a lot of calls for them to finally go and commit this guy. Well, good, they did it. Guess what? He's back out, and now he's taking half the house down. Okay, we've got to go back to long-term care. Some people are, we're going to have to give the authority to give these people the treatment for the amount of time. And some people, unfortunately, are going to have to stay in that care, not just for their safety, but for the safety of everybody, our families, our kids. Because at any moment, who's to say if this guy, okay, now he's shooting deers with bows in his backyard with all these houses around, who's to say he won't start shooting people with it?
Right. You don't know.
You know what I'm saying? Right. So, and then mental health, because of what we've done with mental health, we've increased the homeless situation. I'm not saying everyone homeless has mental health issues. There's a lot of people down on their luck, veterans, stuff like that. But because of their mental health, they can't have a job. The family they could stay with, they can't because they're too dangerous. They're afraid. So they end up homeless. So now we're compounding the homeless problem along with the mental health problem. These are the real issues that need to be dealt with on all levels, from a congressional level, local level. But all this arguing and rhetoric over who we don't like and whatever like that, these are the real issues that affect everyday people. And when I say everyday, it affects everybody, even the rich. If you're rich and you got a business and there's a guy outside swinging a sword every day, and I'm not making this up, this happened in Atlanta. Every day a guy gets in front of his building, just swings a sword, and then the police, well, it's nothing we really can do. He's not hurting anybody. Okay, what about the day he decides to hurt somebody? You see what I'm saying?
Right.
And all of this not only equates to safety, but it all comes back to pockets. How can that business make money? A lot of people quit going there because there's a guy swinging a sword.
Right.
You can't disconnect either of them. But when we sit up here with a bunch of political rhetoric and a bunch of anti-Democrat, anti-Republican, whatever kind of stuff like that, we waste the opportunity to truly help people with the things that truly matter.
Right. It's funny. I'm going to get off topic here because I'm stuck on this whole sword thing. So once upon a time, this may or may not be based on a true story. I might have been on the south side of Lima, Ohio, which that's one of the hoods of Lima. And Lima actually is in the top 50 top crime. Like there's a lot of crime there per capita. I think Rolling Stone had them like 38th out of 50 cities in America. But I knew everybody there. So I went to a little party, got a little tipsy, and me and my friend Smitty, we had just bought these replica King Arthur swords. And so we were a little intoxicated. We were in the middle of like the main drag of Lima, Ohio, just on the south end, pretending like we were sword fighting out in the middle of the street. And the Lima Police Department showed up, and they were not very happy with us.
Did they draw down on y'all?
Yes, they did.
I figured they would for their safety, you know. But you put the sword down. You didn't
did.
stand up there and say, "Hey, I have a right to have a sword."
They didn't
you know
even.
what I'm
I
saying?
saw them coming. I saw them coming. I dropped the sword before they even pulled
There
up. I
you
was
go.
like, "They're coming, Smitty. They're coming.
There you go.
We're going to
There
jail."
you go.
Like
Right. Right.
that was in my more wilder days. I got in a lot of trouble for that. There was a certain sheriff didn't like hearing that story.
I can imagine. I can imagine.
Yeah.
But hey, youth, we've all done something in our youth I'm sure we're not proud of.
Yeah, we were just having a good time. But I could see the danger. Yeah. They were actually real swords.
Right. Yeah. And I know y'all didn't look at it that way. Youth never does. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
it was
one of those things.
Till the cops showed up. Ruined our fun.
Exactly.
Probably kept us from going to the hospital.
Yeah.
But that's the sword thing that got me on. I was like, oh man, I'm having a flashback.
Hey, it's always a good to hear what they call it, a good war story. You know what I'm saying?
I couldn't get away with that in Atlanta. It'd be the end of the day.
Yeah.
I'd have to be calling some emergency contacts probably.
Well, now you can, obviously, because I gotta research how that situation. I came across it the other day when I was doing some research on mental health, because mental health and homelessness is something that has to, and it can be solved.
Right.
I actually saw it solved one time, believe it or not, in a third world country. I was over there as an advisor, and the guy was saying, we don't have any homeless over here. And I was like, really? How'd y'all solve that problem? And he said, the prime minister just built those buildings and gave them a place to live. Now, it wasn't nothing fancy.
Right.
It wasn't, it was probably an upgraded version of Motel 6. But he said, nobody here would be homeless. So if somebody was out there panhandling or out there, they were on their own and they had the authority to lock them up. Hey, it's not like you don't have a place to stay.
Right.
And it makes sense. It makes sense. I mean, we can't, that's what government is supposed to be for. We can't allow people mentally ill to fend for themselves and be a danger to innocent people.
Right.
And we can't just leave people out on the street. And I think we've seen a lot of money spent on things, millions of dollars spent on things that probably nobody really thought was that important. I mean, if it's true that somebody spent $30 million to send condoms to a foreign country, I think we can probably build some type of housing for homeless. But at the same time,
right,
we got to be realistic too. It has to be police. We can't just build a place and say, hey, go live there, and then it's drug infested and whatever like that. It has to be police, and it has to be. Right, and it has to be
another slum.
There has to be training. There has to be whatever like that. But and then the folks that choose to be on the street because they want to be drug addicted, because they want, I can't do drugs here. I would rather be in a tent where I can shoot up. With those folks, then we can enforce ordinance about homelessness. Then nobody can't say, well, why are you locking up the homeless? They're just home.
Yep.
You got a place to stay, so there's no excuse now. And really, that's the only way. That's the only way to solve it.
Yeah, there's plenty of money around there to create these, homeless places. And it's just like you said, you can't just throw them in a building and walk away.
No.
It's got to be organized. There has to be some structure. There has to be, like you said, it has to be monitored and policed, because if you don't, it's just going to get out of control and you're going to end up with another waste of taxpayer money.
Right. And those who are capable, we want to prepare them to go and fend for themselves financially. If we can get them training and jobs, and the ones that aren't, probably is going to be for mental health reasons. But the same thing, that was the key. I think what happened with the 1963 Mental Health Act is they would lock people in asylums for the rest of their lives. They should be evaluated, because maybe after 3 or 4 years, they can go back into society. You can't just lock them away and throw away the key. But then there are some that they will never be able to go out. And that's why you get situations like, we did a podcast on one with this lady. She was obviously mental health, and she had a son. And I mean, you could look at the house, the windows were boarded up or whatever, but her son doesn't come to school for a month. They go check. He's been in the house dead for a month. And she said she was trying to do an exorcist to get the spirits out of him. First of all, she should have already been committed. It was obvious the things this woman was doing, the stuff that somebody should have intervened and say, hey, look, she shouldn't be here. She shouldn't have this child. We got to intervene. But because of the fact that we don't really have the stuff in place or the laws in place or whatever, well, it's nothing we can do about it. Well, we just gotta grab the bull by the horns, by the horns and do something about it.
Yeah.
And logically, that's the only thing we can do.
What is the system that they have in place right now? Isn't there like a federal, like mental, like you call a certain number and then they'll come out and on a mental health emergency and they'll just nab up your loved one and throw them in for 72-hour observation? And
I got to look. I can't really answer that. I'm doing more research. It used to be. Let me tell you something. I'm not sure about that because, and you might be right, but I can tell you when I was sheriff, we had a woman walking in the traffic trying to get hit by a car. They called my deputies, get her for 3 hours. They tried to get her committed. And they asked the folks that couldn't, do you know someone we could call? So they called and they said, hey, we nobody will take her. So what do we do? Do we just let her go back out there and walk in front of a car, or not just get herself killed, but maybe kill somebody because they're trying to avoid her or whatever? So I was like, hey, lock her up for impeding traffic, and then I'll put her in a mental health ward at a jail. So we had to criminalize that's a person that she's really,
that was all you could do, though.
That was all I could do. So that's why I'm saying if that existed, I'm sure my guys would have called. I'm not saying that don't, maybe they didn't, but they asked for whatever. But we need that. We need something, but it needs to be more than 72 hours. It needs to be more long-term care. Right. It's going to have to be more than 72 hours. A person that just walk in front of a car, and then 72 hours later, we can turn them loose. And there are some people, like some of the ones we're seeing now, that the one that killed her son, another one, they've shown these signs for a while. And they can't make it back in society, but that don't mean they can't get good care and live in a decent environment where they can get medication, treatment. But at the same time, we're protecting them from society, and society is protected from them, or protecting them from themselves, rather, is what I should say.
Right.
And we got to be realistic. It's not a jail, but guess what? They some of them are dangerous. They're going to have to be people there that have correction officer skills. And sad to say, one of the best things to be at those facilities is what I got sent to prison for, is a restraint chair.
Yep.
Sad to say, some of those guys I asked to be restrained, I knew they were mental. And you can hear me saying, hey, also get them evaluated.
Yep.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And because those type of things work, because restraint chairs are in mental hospitals as a preventative
Yes,
thing.
it is.
Not punishment, preventative.
Right.
But when you twist it for political prosecution, well, now all of a sudden it becomes a felony.
Right. And that's exactly right. The chairs are not there for discipline. They're there so the individual doesn't hurt themselves or somebody else. They're very effective. I've used them lots of times in my career. It's an effective tool to keep that individual safe and to keep the officer safe and to keep other inmates safe. And it's unfortunate that they use that as a political tool to basically try to end your career. And, that's unfortunate. That's a low blow, I think.
That's exactly right. And the sad part is, look at the expense. You use that to come after me politically, but look what you caused. You took a tool that was working, and 5 people are dead.
Yep.
5 people that, if that restraint chair was there, they wouldn't have been dead. One we know for sure, he was trying to commit suicide. And the officers were afraid to use the chair because they thought, well, I guess the way we're using it is illegal. So what do? They hold him down and end up suffocating the poor man, and he dies.
Yeah.
He would have instantly went to the restraint chair, been checked by a nurse, checked every 15 minutes. So it's amazing, I hope that the people behind this prosecution realize that your objective in trying to win an election got 5 people killed.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
And if you're an officer after the fact, do I want to put somebody in the restraint chair? My sheriff, he went to prison for using the restraint chair. I'm not putting nobody in that thing. So they just completely took away the effectiveness of the restraint chair. Now nobody's going to want to use it because nobody wants to go to prison over it.
And they lied to a jury and told them, well, they weren't uncontrollably violent when they were put in the chair. I don't think we've ever put anybody uncontrollably violent in the chair because it's hard. I don't know if you can put an uncontrollably violent person in a chair. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Because there would have to be some type of confrontation first. It's just like the people in the hospitals and schools where they use it at. Right. You do it before it gets to that point.
Yeah. You know how hard that would be? Yeah. I don't think people understand how many straps are on a restraint chair. Exactly. You would have to sit on the person to get all the straps on, because especially the waist strap, because they're going to arch. You're never going to get that waist strap strapped if they're completely out of their mind. They have to be somewhat calm, and expressing, some passive, threats. And, you know how it is. You're not going to be able to get somebody that's insanely crazy. You're going to end up on the floor with them, and they're going to get pepper sprayed and everything else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But yet you look at Gwinnett County, and there were people who weren't uncontrollably violent. The CERT team runs in, slams them to the ground, tased some of them, pepper spray them, put them in a restraint chair. No criminal charges. Every situation that we use, roll up the chair, hey, sit down, put it here, no fight, no nothing. And then suddenly it becomes a felony.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah. One thing you can always know if a prosecution is political is when it comes about. And if it comes when a person is running for or re-election, that right there tells you everything. You can say whatever you want, and I'm not going to go deep into that, but like even on the presidential level, you hear about it. Oh no, okay, listen. It happened when he said he was going to run for re-election. And every time I've been prosecuted, I was either running for office or running for re-election. Anytime DA start prosecuting you right before you run for office, that should be a telltale sign right there. Like that RICO prosecution. If I really stole my police car 5 times, why wasn't I charged then? Why wasn't I charged the month after I left office or the year after? But I announced I'm running for sheriff 4 years later, and hey, we need a special purpose grand jury. Hey, he stole his police car. That should be a sign right there.
Yep.
Right. Always look at these grand juries and how many politicians get indicted around election time.
I never really put 2 and 2 together. Now I'm going to be watching that.
Yeah, time is very, very, very crucial. Very, very crucial. Like I said, whether you like him or not, whether whatever, it's interesting how the president gets indicted after he says he's running for office.
Yeah, it's amazing how that timing just worked out.
Right. If he didn't run for office, I get the strange feeling he wouldn't have got indicted.
Yeah. No, they would have said, he's out of the way now.
Yeah, exactly. And that's lawfare. If you don't like him, if you don't like me, fine, don't vote for us. But you don't indict people because you don't want them to win. And when you got people like our DA and Clayton and we got another lunatic here in Georgia too, in Fulton County, when you see stuff like that, and like I said, they just don't do it to politicians. They do it to celebrities. I mean, we saw a lot of crazy stuff. And I call it the Robert Ford syndrome. A lot of people don't know who Robert Ford is, but he's the person that shot and killed Jesse James.
Right.
And he thought, and he shot him in the back, but he thought if he staged a shootout and he killed Jesse James, that he would suddenly get all this recognition, that whatever Jesse James had would automatically pass to him. Well, obviously it didn't work because nobody knows who he is. You even look like who the hell was that? Right. On his tombstone, it says, "Here lies the man that shot and killed Jesse James." Okay, well, you got to put another man on your tombstone. That's pretty bad. But a lot of prosecutors are like that. They go to law school. Now they're a prosecutor. Nobody knows who they are. And they've got to figure out, well, if I just put regular criminals in jail, nobody will know. But if I indict a celebrity, if I indict the Chrisleys, if I indict Young Thug, if whatever,
really well.
then then it'll raise me to a certain level.
Yeah.
And so some of them, there's issues there. They need a press conference. Well, I can't get a press conference if I just indict a criminal no one ever heard of.
Right.
So let's indict somebody that everyone heard of so we can get some publicity over here. Then I can get on the news, and then hopefully I can get a book deal or whatever. And you see a lot of that. What was the guy? He's a famous actor. He had an accidental shooting.
Baldwin.
And I can relate to that. Right. Okay. How did that go to a trial? Wasn't it murder? I can't remember, but or did they do it? Right. But it was obviously an accident. What you got to ask with things like that is, was he indicted for the accident, or was he indicted because he was Alec Baldwin? And we know the answer to that. Let me tell you this. I've had an accidental shooting. Fortunately, the person didn't pass away. They're alive and well. Hell, they're in better shape than I am. But let me tell you this, what's interesting. The first deputy ever killed in the line of duty at the Clayton County Sheriff's Office was an accidental shooting. Wow. It was a training incident, and the deputy accidentally shot that deputy, and unfortunately he died. There was no indictment. There was no criminal charges. It was an accident. It was an unfortunate accident and a sad one. But that's not what he meant to do. That's not what happened. And right. I'm sure, you can't, when you have an accident, there's nothing you can do to punish that person worse than what has already happened.
Yeah.
Because, right, you just can't. But I have an accident, and man, it turns into a murder investigation. They tried to kill the person, and the person didn't even die. They're like waiting for them to die and coming up with a whole murder plot, tried to indict me for aggravated assault. And even after, hey, it was an accident. So you got to look at these prosecutions and see what it's really about. Was I prosecuted for that because it was an accident and they truly cared about the person? They thought something was wrong? Or were they trying to prosecute me because I'm Victor Hill, I'm the sheriff, and we can finally get him and get our guy in office? And that's what you got to look at these things. It's all a part of lawfare. You got people, and the same time I had that accident, somebody else had a similar accident on Terra Boulevard in a pawn shop and accidentally shot the person next to him. No news media, nothing. Why? Because I guess just a regular person, no charges, no indictment. So again, was I indicted because I was the sheriff, or was I indicted because we're truly trying to, we're holding everyone accountable and all of that. And then it gets to this, we got to hold people to a higher standard. Okay.
Yeah, what about it's all baloney?
It's a bunch of BS that prosecutors say at press conferences or whatever. I don't think anyone should be held to a lower standard, a different standard, or a higher standard. Hold everybody to the same standard. If we're going to prosecute people for accidents, prosecute them all. If we're not, don't do it at all.
Yep.
And that's where we see this lawfare and selective prosecution and stuff like that comes in, and something that I will be a warrior to fight against for the rest of my days.
So that is a really good platform to go on, because it's a big problem in the 5th district, with the crime rates the way they are, with all the, you can pretty much watch A&E and watch 30 Days In and see how every jail is in Metro Atlanta. So
yes,
they're not pretty. And, so we get to see these in real time. Of course, they edit to make them not look as bad as what they are, but they're really bad. Even here where I live in Henry County, we have bad stuff happen in our jail all the time here. And, so it's an interesting, platform that you don't really hear a lot of politicians talking about criminal justice reform, or how do we solve some of these problems. You may hear them say it in passing, but they're not going to put any real effort into it, because generally it's when you look at the prison systems, how many of them are privatized. So it's a cash cow. You look at the county jails, a lot of them will house federal inmates there. So they use that as a cash cow.
Yes.
Everything is a marketable commodity in the criminal justice system, which is causing problems in the criminal justice system. So cops can't do their jobs properly. Corrections staff can't do their jobs properly. You have that greed in that system causes so many problems. Then you throw in like what you said, the political aspect of it, and it just makes it like a big giant ball of dynamite ready to blow up all the time. And that's a problem.
Let me tell you something else that's sad. Not just the fact that the jails are out of control, but you know how many shootings we've had in Atlanta. I think in Atlanta, was it the weekend before last, 22 people shot, 2 dead.
That was a bad one.
Clayton County, we had a 14-year-old shot at a skating rink, 17-year-old shot in front of Kroger, another one shot in back of Walmart, 4 shot at First Baptist Church, another one shot while doing a job. We got a lot of gun violence. Let me tell you something that's very interesting to me. I'm not a big fan of community police, and people are like, what? It's like, oh my God, that's like being an atheist or something, which is there's no comparison. There's no comparison, right? So, but you see all of this, hey, we're gonna make videos, break dancing, we're gonna sing, we're gonna stay still like a mannequin, everything to prove how nice we are. Let's have car shows.
Let's get Shaq over here. Get Shaq to play basketball.
Yeah, and now he was my honorary deputy at one time too.
I love
we'll
Shaq.
leave Shaq out of it. I love it. Right.
But Shaq, you're a good dude, Shaq.
He is. So actually, he really is. This dude has a heart of gold. I mean,
I believe
he's done so much to help people. He really
seems
does.
Legit.
But he is. But the point I'm trying to make is this. June is actually Gun Violence Month. So I just started. I haven't checked everybody, but I did check everyone in Clayton County, and I'm getting ready to check. I want to check Clayton, and I want to check DeKalb, and I want to check Fulton. And the reason I want to check those is that's where the 5th Congressional District is at. But I can tell you in Clayton County, I just looked at everybody's social media, and I saw cookouts. I saw a picture to honor Gay Pride Week. I saw dancing with fans. I saw everything. Nothing I saw on anybody's page, not the DA's page, not the sheriff's page, not the county police page, talked about, hey, this is gun violence week or gun violence. Nothing. Now, I'm not saying that the issues that they're talking about of course, we're concerned with breast cancer. Of course, we're concerned with sickle cell. I mean, at the sheriff's office, there's a car almost for every disease: breast cancer, sickle cell, HIV. Of course, but we got to ask ourselves: are you the sheriff of the health department,
right?
Or are you the sheriff of the county? So, I mean, if you are going to have a car and have people sign it, maybe you need a gun violence car, especially the amount of people getting shot in Clayton County.
Right.
And what are we doing to stop that? And I can tell you, I know how to stop gun violence. I have lowered gun violence, and you don't stop it with a cookout.
No.
You don't stop it by getting on the ground and playing with dolls with little girls, or you don't get it by getting on TV and crying and showing you're human too, to show how emotional you are.
Right.
When you're trying to stop gun violence, you got to do real police work and aggressive police work. You got to take the shooters off the street. That's the only thing. You got to take the guns from them, and you got to just take them and the guns off the street. That's how that's done. I'm not saying take guns from everybody. I'm saying taking guns from the shooters.
I mean, you pretty much know when you're in a community, that has a lot of action. You pretty much know who's doing what, and it's like you said, it's not taking the guns from everybody. It's going. We know who the problem children are, and we're going to go handle that. And you're not seeing that in a lot of other districts and other departments and other areas. They're not doing that. They're not doing enough of it. And I don't know if it's because we have a shortage or if it's because the leadership just says, well, let's not put a lot of pressure on the community. Everybody probably has their own method for dealing with these things, but it just seems like if you're not going to fully go on at the problem, you're never going to solve the problem. If you just dance around it, they're just going to dance around you too. So
part of it has to do with fear, and it has to do with fear of lawfare. Part of it is, prosecutors have been trying to make a career off of prosecuting cops, whether they're right or wrong.
Right.
And if they're wrong, fine. But just to be prosecuting cops just to get your stats or to prove to a particular political stuff like what we saw a lot of that in Fulton County. I mean, they indicted a cop for aggravated assault who tackled a guy who was getting ready to resist another officer. He tackles him. Then when they get up, the guy's hobbling. Well, unfortunately, when they fell, his ankle snapped. Okay, now listen, if this cop had stood on top of his foot and snapped it, I'd be all for it. But he wasn't trying to snap his ankle. He was trying to stop the situation from getting out of control. The guy was already non-compliant, wouldn't stop the car, got out, slaps the other officer's hand. I think you and I know good and well that person is not going to de-escalate or say, okay, whatever. So when he tackles the guy and handcuffs him, somehow they fall and the guy snaps his ankle. That's not aggravated assault.
No.
But see,
if you're resisting a lawful order in an aggressive manner, it's kind of puts the liability on yourself.
I agree, but if he had snapped his ankle, that's what he was trying to do. He's like, "Hey, hold his leg while I snap his ankle." That's
that's a whole other.
They fail,
right?
And when they fail, sometimes you fall wrong. We've all fall wrong and got a sprained ankle or whatever like that.
Yeah.
When you charge cops for stuff like that, you make other cops afraid to do their job. You're talking about aggravated assault. Aggravated assault is really the equivalent of attempted murder.
Right.
It's a series that it carries 20 years. You telling me because he tackled a guy who was resisting arrest and that happened, you're going to charge him with aggravated assault? So when cops are in that environment, they're going to be reluctant to do their job. Yeah. They're going to be fearful to do their job. So the type of police work that's really takes to clean up the streets, they're afraid to do. So that's why you see them go to, well, I know what, you know what? Let's just do some community stuff and hope for the best. Right, because if we get out here and we really start taking names and doing what we need to do, you got these DAs like the one in Fulton now indict you for an aggravated assault or whatever, and you got that, so they're afraid to do their job. So now they're concentrating on all kinds of stuff. So now it turns into a clown show. Okay, let's cry on TV. Let's breastfeed babies. Yeah, let's do everything that has absolutely nothing to do with reducing the crime rate. And you see a concentration on that stuff. Let's put diseases on different cars and whatever like that. Let's bring why are we putting disease on cars? Well, we're bringing awareness to it. Okay, that's cool. But your job is crime. Why not bring awareness to all the people getting shot in your county? And let the health department bring awareness to that stuff and let them deal with it. But they don't know what to do. I saw one chief of police was sewing COVID masks during the COVID crisis. Her community thing is, see, I'm here sewing. I'm a community person. Okay. You know how bad the crime was during COVID?
Right.
And you sitting there like somebody's grandmother sewing a COVID mask. There are plenty of people that sew the COVID mask. You should have been having boots on the ground.
Yeah, Chief Betsy
stopping
Ross.
the stuff that would happen, because so many jails were like, we're not accepting anybody because it's COVID, which was a mistake.
Right.
So now you just let these criminals run loose.
Yeah.
So, people talk about COVID took the crime out. It wasn't COVID that made the crime go up. It was people's reaction and fear to COVID. Because when every sheriff that runs a jail saying, we're not going to take you in jail unless you kill somebody. We didn't do that in Clayton County. We continued to take it. The jail was clean. It was sanitized. And our COVID rate was less than 1%.
Right.
So, and let's just say I had a contamination of COVID-19 in a jail. What sense would it make for me to release them to the public so that they can infect everybody else?
Right.
But that's what happened. They let everybody out of jail and said, we're not taking anybody in. And then they wonder why the crime went up. Did the crime go up because of COVID-19, or did it go up because you made law enforcement afraid to do their jobs?
Yeah, they put potential violent criminals back out on the street.
And that's why you saw the spike in crime that they did in COVID. And I actually had people sue me. Oh, he's holding in there with COVID. We did not have not one COVID death. They tried to lie and make a 80-some-year-old man make it sound like it was COVID related, but it wasn't. he had already since been cured. He just died of old age. And so it was when they did the autopsy, it was not COVID-19.
Right.
So, these type of reasons why, and that's why you see all of these cops sewing masks, playing with baby dolls on the ground, doing whatever, and it's not working. Now, am I saying that we don't be nice to people? Of course we're going to be nice to people. We're nice to the good people, but we got to be hard on the bad guys.
Right. And that's at all levels. You go from the county criminals all the way up to the prosecutors and the judges. There's got to be a complete oversight of every aspect of it. I'm not saying that the structure of the system's wrong, other than the grand jury. I would like to say, I agree with you. I think the grand jury needs to go away.
That changes the whole game right there.
Right. Right.
But we also need to go after prosecutors who go and lie to grand juries,
right,
or get people indicted on crimes that don't fit the element of the crime.
Right.
If they indict you for murder when the elements of what you did was involuntary manslaughter, that shouldn't happen.
Or circumstantial evidence. You shouldn't be able to go into a grand jury with a bunch of circumstantial nonsense and get an indictment. That's not supposed to happen like that either.
Absolutely. And these are the things that we have to work on. And I plan on working on it from a congressional level. And we can make it happen.
And you know what, Victor Hill, I believe in you. And
thank you.
I'm excited to see how this goes. And I'm going to be following you. And like we talked, anytime you need me, I'm going to be there. My one trick question. I got one trick question.
Sure.
When you get there, are you going to work with Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Let me tell you this. I'm glad you asked that question. I was a hostage negotiator for 10 years. And let me tell you what I'm going with. I'm not saying she's taking hostages, nothing like that. I'm not. Okay. Let's make sure we're going with that. Okay. And let me tell you what I learned as a hostage negotiator. Okay. I have never talked to anyone out of anything by calling them names, by insulting them, or whatever. That is not how you get a person to come out. And let me just say again for the record, I'm not trying to accuse anyone of being a barricaded suspect or nothing. But also, I have never talked them out by insulting the people who love and support them. Okay, because I don't care what he did. He could just murdered 5 people. If he's in there, he has a mother and some family members who are praying he'll come out safely and we don't have to send SWAT in or whatever.
Right.
So I have never solved those situations by insulting them and saying, how can you support this guy? What's wrong with you? Or whatever like that. That's not how you negotiate anything.
Right.
And a great man once said that there is no legislation that has ever passed without compromise. I can tell you as a former legislator, that's true. Because by the time it goes through committee and it does this and that, there's a lot of compromise. And sometimes you don't get the full bill you want. Sometimes you got to get that passed and then come back and amend it or whatever like that. But that's not how you get things done.
Right.
My success as a sheriff, as a homicide detective, and as a negotiator was being able to build relations and talk to people regardless of their beliefs, regardless of what people think about them, regardless of whatever. That's how things are done.
Right.
And I just want to make sure I'm not trying to compare anybody to anything, because I don't make opinions on people based on crowds or whatever like that. I have to meet a person for themselves. You can't get me to hate somebody because you hate them. They got to give me a reason to hate them. But that's how it's done. There was, and I got to be real careful saying this because I'm not trying to compare or make any relation. But before I left office, there was a Klansman living in Clayton County. and
Oh, really?
he was hanging things from nooses in his yard every Halloween. And he and I had an interesting conversation. And, the conversation started that, this might be a county you need to leave, but we were able to come to whatever. And believe it or not, the man said, hey, look, I actually like living here. I feel safe because of you. I won't cause you no more problems. You know what I'm saying? And we had a good conversation, and there was a meeting of the minds, and that was the end of that. But I talk to everybody, and I build relationships with anyone I can build relationships with to get things done.
Right.
You can't get anything done unless you can build relationships, unless you can negotiate, unless you can compromise. And you're not going to get anything done calling names and doing stuff like that. I'm going to get things done. And if the people who elect me want me to get some things done, they're not going to want me to run out constantly arguing and yelling and calling folks names and doing stuff like that, because that's not how you get anything done.
Right. I think that's a good way to look at it. On TV, she looks like a difficult person to work with, but I believe that she probably represents her district well. And if I remember correctly, they redrew her district. I think she's at the top of Cobb County. Her district goes down into Cobb County a little bit, I think now, if I remember correct.
Could well be. Let me tell you this. Here's another reason why I refuse to dislike anybody that I haven't met and I don't know. Do you know how many people don't like me or have an opinion of me and never met me? You know how many people think I'm the head of the mob, that think I'm a tyrant? Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people I meet, they're like, you're nothing like what I thought. Well, what did you think? Well, when you see the news, and you can't believe anything the news says. That's why everybody's turning to podcasts now. So, no, if you want me to hate Marjorie Taylor, if you want me to hate the president because you do, no, I'm not going to.
Right.
I haven't even met them.
Right.
And I'm not going to do to them what so many people have done to me. Make an assumption of who I am and what I am based on what you've seen on TV or based on what I've been accused of.
Yep. That's a great way to look at it.
Absolutely.
Because you might find some things. I think you and her would work really well on the criminal justice reform. That's something
we probably will
very well about that.
Right. I've never even met her, so I'm gonna hate her, and I'm not working with what that sounds crazy.
Right.
I'm not that type of politician and never will be. Yeah.
So what do you when you look at the city of Atlanta and the mayor side of things, do you have any opinions on that when you look at where we were at with Keisha Lance Bottoms and now where we're at with Andre Dickens?
Well, let me say this. I think I write a book about the Atlanta riots. And some people think I was too harsh and some people think I was too nice.
Right.
But I think that book says a lot about what I think about what was going on at that particular time. Those riots could have been prevented.
Right.
And when it got out of control, I was called at the last minute that, hey, we need help. And it was my group and my team that squashed that. And,
called Batman.
That city didn't go out of control because APD couldn't control it, or APD don't know what they're doing. I know a lot of APD officers, they could have handled that. They weren't allowed to handle it. When it first started, they didn't have any riot gear. They didn't have anything. Again, we're trying to do this community policing thing. The chief, who I have nothing against her, who was chief at that time, nice lady. She made this video talking about, hey, I understand why everyone's upset. She was walking around talking to people, trying to be nice. And what did they do? Throw a water bottle at her.
Yeah.
Okay. And when that water bottle was thrown and nothing was done to address it, and nothing was done. And there's this thing that's pervasive out there. Was just a water bottle. Just let them express themselves. No, if you throw a water bottle at the chief of police, what else would you done? That would have ended right then and there with me. I would have stopped everything right there. Right. And then next thing you look, there's a guy on top of a car burning something. Next thing you look, the car is burning. Then they're destroying the CNN thing. If that would have been nipped in the bud right then and there, it would have never happened. Yeah. Why was it allowed to get out of control? First of all, they're trying this community police and stuff. Not the police, but they're being forced to do it because of the politicians. Number two, they're afraid that if they had shut it down, well, you're not giving people right to free speech. No, that's not what it's about. There's a difference between protesters and rioters. Protesters are just people who want to bring attention to something. Rioters just want to see the city burn. You're not stopping it because of protest. You're stopping it because of rioters. Right. And by stopping it, you're actually protecting the protesters, because they get hurt in the middle of that. And they didn't come there to start fires and do that stuff. Yep. But now they get in the crossfire.
Yeah, and they get unfortunately in there.
Exactly. So no one's saying that we don't want free speech and we don't want people to protest. Yeah, protest all day, all year. But there are folks that come there and they use it as a time to loot, riot, burn, pillage, everything else. And for the safety of everyone, it has to stop. But let me tell you what I write about in the book, and what will always stay with me. You got those riots that started. Then right after that, and you had the shooting at the Wendy's. So after that shooting at the Wendy's, I get a call from a friend of mine that lives in the city of Atlanta. He says, "Hey, did you know that they got a road check in front of Wendy's?" I said, "No, but that's good. Road checks help reduce crime." He said, No, I'm not talking about the police. He said, "There's some guys with rifles just doing a road check." And I said, "Are you sure about that?" He said, "I'm telling you." I said, "Do you have a picture or video?" He said, "Check your phone." I just rode past it. So I look at it. So then I said, "Let me call the chief of police." So at that time, Erica Shields is gone. There's the next guy takes a place. Nice guy too, Rodney. Okay. So I called him. I said, "Hey man, did you know that there's some armed thugs with a road check?" And he said, "No, I didn't know that." I said, "Check your phone. I just sent you the picture." And these were the words I said to him. I said, "Listen, I don't know what your relationship is with the mayor." I said, "But she's either going to let you be the chief or she's not." And I said, you're either going to run the streets or the criminals are going to run the street. And I said, if she's not going to let you handle these thugs, I don't know if it's worth it unless you need the money, because this could ruin your whole career, because he had already retired or whatever.
Right.
And he was like, "Oh, no, I got this. I'm going to handle it." Well, to his credit, I know he did, because I had a friend that was on SWAT saying, "Hey, we're getting brief. We're going to do an operation tomorrow," or however that timeline was, to stop these guys with the road check. Okay. Well, a couple of days went by. I never heard anything. So I called my friend back. I said, "Did y'all stop it? How did it go?" I hadn't seen nothing on the news or whatever. He said, "No, we were told to stand down. City Hall told the chief, don't do it. We'll just have to talk to them. We don't want any problems." Here we go with this community police. And we know what happens next. 2-3 weeks later, an 8-year-old child is killed.
Yep.
I have a lot of issues with that. I have an issue with who was sheriff at that time. The sheriff, by Constitution, says that the sheriff has a duty to protect. That's the only office in Georgia that it says it. Doesn't say that about the police. It has a duty to protect. All this craziness about sheriffs only do warrants or whatever, that's not what the state constitution says. It says they have a duty to protect. I can tell you this right now. When I was sheriff, I wouldn't care if you had a road check inside the city of Riverdale, Morrow, or rather than the county or not. That would have ended that day.
Right.
Right. It wouldn't matter if they told the police chief, "Stand down, we don't want any problems." You can't have thugs doing that. The city got out of control and spiraled out of control. And I don't know if we truly got it back under control after that. We saw a lot of craziness on TV. We saw people walking up to officers saying, "Get your you know what in your car and get out of here." And the officer got back in the car and got out of there. There's this new thing that's pervasive now about disrespecting authority, about with the police. And I don't know if people understand it, but it's not good if you want to be safe. When you take that type of authority and respect from the people who protect you, they can't protect you. They're going to stop protecting you. They're afraid to protect you, because if they do, then they end up being charged like I was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you get all these shootings, and you give the jails back to the criminals. We control the Clayton County Jail. Now the criminals control the Clayton County Jail. I had someone tell me, who's the sheriff now? I was like, what are you talking about? There's obviously a new sheriff in that jail, because it ain't the sheriff. Someone is in there running it, because he's running the drugs and the phones.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? And basically, by prosecuting me and by doing what you did to these officers, you handed control back to the criminals. You told them you're in charge now. It almost reminds me of the school system when they started prosecuting teachers and, oh my God, don't defend yourself, don't do nothing. And now we see teachers getting jumped, spit on, kicked.
Yeah,
they've lost complete control of the school. Why? Because the teachers are afraid to administer any type of discipline.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it was probably the worst. Yeah, when they took corporal punishment out of school, people say when they took prayer out of school, I believe it's corporal punishment was a problem. It was corporal punishment that had kids praying, because we were praying not to get the paddle. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you got right with God real quick when the principal was holding the paddle.
Exactly. So, but that's the type of craziness we got out here now. And it's mostly affected. People say it's policymakers, but prosecutors affected more than anything else.
Oh, yeah.
When they started 100%. Locking up teachers, the schools went out of control. Then they started locking up parents. Now the parents are afraid to discipline. So now they run the kids. And then now the police can't do anything. And now we got an unsafe society.
Yep. That's why these kids, it's the kids acting crazy, because there's nobody left to hold them accountable anymore.
Yeah. And they'll be the first to tell you, you can't do that to me.
Yeah, they will too.
Oh yeah, and get their parents. I know a lady. Technically she's my aunt. I mean, I consider her aunt, and her 15-year-old just got her locked up.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
The power that those kids have now.
Yeah, right.
And they abuse it every day.
Absolutely. When kids can get their parents locked up, when inmates can get the sheriff locked up, when students can get the teachers locked up, how can we be surprised that we have the crime that we have in an out of control situation? And all you got to do is have a bunch of silly, mentally ill prosecutors like we got right here in Atlanta, and now you see why 22 people get shot and all the other craziness happens.
Yeah, it's been bad lately. It's been real bad lately. It's out of control. Absolutely. Well, Victor, I'm going to give you the floor, and you're going to give us your best Victor Hill spiel, or should we call you the Atlanta's Frank Lucas?
Right, Frank Lucas goes to Congress, right? Yeah,
Lucas goes to Congress. I love it.
Wow, right? Yeah. Well, let me just say this. I'm not the factory spit politician. Never have, never. I've always been a fighter for the people. I fought crime. And I'm still fighting crime. I'm just fighting a different type of crime. I'm fighting a corrupt weaponization of the criminal justice system. So, I think everybody knows that I was a sheriff that never slept. Right. If someone got killed in my county 3 a.m, I got up and I went to see about it. I'm going to be the congressman that never sleeps. And I believe in delivering results, not rhetoric. And you elect me to Congress, and that's what you'll get, results. If you just want rhetoric, if you just want someone to go up there and argue with the Republicans and argue with the president, we already got that. And what did we get? Nothing. If you got somebody that's going to be able to go out there, a trained negotiator, and someone that knows how to get things done, and someone who understands that you've got to build relationships so nothing gets done, then I'm the man for the job.
And there you have it, straight from the man's mouth, Victor Hill. So I want to thank you, Victor, for coming on my show, and I look forward to building a partnership. and tell your brother his podcast is awesome. I love it.
I will. I will.
Everybody, do all your research before you judge this man based upon some big headlines that they pick and choose to paint him as. Because the Victor Hill that you read about in the paper is not the Victor Hill of the man that we just talked to today. You're seeing a guy who's ready to get into Congress and do the right thing, especially for the 5th district here in Georgia. It's a tough task. It's a disaster. Everybody in Atlanta knows that the 5th district's a disaster, and who better to clean it up than Victor Hill? So once again, thanks for coming on my show, Victor. And it's going to be a fun ride. I can already tell.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, man. It's an honor.
Yes, sir. All right. We'll see everybody next time. Well, it doesn't want to stop.